They say a single choice can bend a man's life in half, even if he doesn't feel it happen. Out here, kindness is rarer than rain, and sometimes it carries a price no one warned you about. So, before this story pulls you into the dust and heat of the frontier, remember to like the video and tell us where you're watching from. The trading stop sat low against a stretch of dry ground. Less than 30 paces from the bend of the San Pedro River, it wasn't much to look at. Scrap boards nailed together. Half-rotted canvas stretched tight, just enough to keep the sun off what little goods passed through. It was more a place for barter than a proper store. No sign, no clerk. Just a few men who drifted in when they needed something and disappeared when they were done. That afternoon, the heat pressed down hard, sharp enough to make sweat run even on men who'd grown up under desert skies. Cottonwoods nearby offered shade that barely touched the dirt. A trail horse stood tied to a post, flicking flies with an impatient tail. Silas Mercer came in on foot. He'd left his mare tied under a mesquite tree 100 yards back. He didn't like crowding her where other animals might kick or bite. He carried nothing but a coin pouch hidden. Inside his coat and a short list in his head, salt. Maybe a strip of leather lampwick if the price wasn't foolish. He didn't come here often, only when he had to. Silas was 39, not young anymore, but not worn down either. Time had shaped his face into something steady and hard to read. He didn't talk much. Once, he'd worked with a freight outfit, hauling loads across the desert with ox teams. That ended 5 years earlier when a bad turn, during monsoon season, buried 2 men under his watch. After that, he sold the rig, took what money was left, and built a cabin farther west, where land was cheap and neighbors didn't ask questions. Now, he spent his days tending worn soil and keeping to himself, and that suited him fine. As he stepped up to the post, he noticed 2 men leaning over a table. Their voices were flat but edged with something ugly. One of them, broad-backed, maybe mid-30s, sharp mouth, was talking over an older Apache woman. She stood behind a woven basket. Inside were coiled ropes, shaped wood, and a couple pairs of moccasins. The man held one moccasin in his hand, twisting it like he was testing leather. But his price was an insult. The woman didn't argue. She stared ahead, not at him, not at anyone. Her clothes were travel-worn, shawl layered for the sun, eyes still as stone. Silas watched from a few steps back. He didn't know her, didn't know which people she came from, but he knew what he was seeing. The men had no intention of paying fair. They didn't care how far she'd walked or what she'd carried. They were there to grind her down, not trade. He stepped forward. No noise, no show. He didn't reach for a weapon, just stood beside her, close enough that it was clear she wasn't alone anymore. The man with the moccasin looked up, annoyed at first. Then his expression shifted to calculation. Silas didn't look dangerous, but he didn't look like someone who stepped aside either. "Something you need?" the man asked.
Silas didn't answer.
He glanced once at the moccasin in the man's hand, then down at the basket. He crouched, checked the contents, stood again, and reached into his coat. 5 silver coins landed in the woman's open palm. He didn't touch her. His hand pulled back quick, not from fear, but from respect. The men muttered a few half-hearted words and walked off. Silas stayed a moment watching the woman. Her face gave nothing away, but her fingers closed tight around the coins, jaw set firm. She didn't speak or nod. She lifted her basket and walked toward the trees. Silas went to the bench, asked for salt, left the overpriced lampwick behind, paid and rode out. The ride home was quiet. His mare moved easy under him, steady on the trail. He glanced back once toward where the woman had gone, but the river bend vanished behind scrubben hills. At his cabin he unloaded slow. The yard was dry and cracked, but the well still held water. Chickens scratched near the fence. His dog, a lean brown mutt, lay in the shade and barely lifted its head. Inside, everything was as he'd left it. Bed made, shelves clean, stove swept. He washed his hands, sat on the porch, and watched the sun dip low, turning dust red. A hawk called somewhere distant. He didn't think he'd done anything special. He hadn't stepped in for thanks or reward. He just couldn't watch someone be cheated in broad daylight. Still, something in his chest felt tight, the kind of tight that didn't ease with a deep breath. He didn't know it yet, But that moment was already pulling his life onto a different trail. 3 days passed without a word about it. Silas split kindling, patched the roof before the next monsoon, checked the fence for signs of antelope pressing through. His routine didn't change, but his thoughts kept circling back to that trade post. Not because he expected anything to come of it, but because he remembered the woman's eyes. There had been something in them older than gratitude, maybe anger, maybe endurance. That evening the light cut sharp through the trees, stretching long shadows across the yard.
Chickens roosted early.
The dog didn't bark. Silas had just set a boiled potato and salted meat on a tin plate when he heard it. 3 short knocks on the porch frame, not the door. He grabbed his coat on instinct and opened up slow. The old Apache woman stood just beyond the threshold, shoulders straighter than before. Her basket now held wrapped bundles tied with cord. Behind her stood 2 young women, mid-20s at most. The one on the left stepped forward. Taller, jaw sharp, eyes quick, the kind that took in everything at once. The other stayed behind the elder's shoulder, head tilted slightly down, braid tied low. Dressed simple but clean, Silas didn't speak. The elder didn't wait. "You didn't take anything from me," she said. Her voice was low, worn by years, stripped of softness. She set the basket on the porch without crossing the threshold. "These are my daughters. This land you live here without a wife. I saw it on your face. You belong to no one. That matters." Silas didn't move. She went on. "One will stay the night. No trade, no promise. The other and I will leave before sunrise." She turned to go. The taller daughter followed without hesitation. The quieter one stayed. Silas looked at her. She didn't step closer or speak. She waited. He opened the door wider and stepped back. "You hungry?" She nodded once. Inside, he pulled a crate forward, set a second plate down. She entered, closed the door quietly and stood by the wall. He pointed to the plate. She sat and ate slow, careful, like every motion mattered. They didn't talk. Silence sat easy between them. He watched how she scanned the room without turning her head, how her fingers stayed near the plate's edge, how her eyes flicked toward the door when the wind gusted. She wasn't waiting for words. She was waiting to see if she was safe. When they finished, she set the plate in the basin. He laid out an extra blanket near the stove, away from the draft. She moved to it without instruction, sat cross-legged, hands folded in her lap. He kept one candle lit and sat by the door. The quiet wasn't empty. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them needed to name. Before dawn, the elder returned. No greetings, no small talk. She stood in the yard with the taller daughter as the light crept over the ridge. Silas opened the door. The younger woman rose, braid loose, eyes clearer. She looked at Silas, not her mother. "She can come now, or she can stay," the elder said. "It's not my word that keeps her." Silas looked down, then up. "She's free to stay if she wants." The elder and the taller daughter walked off, dust rising around their steps. No goodbye. No ceremony. Silas stepped aside so the girl could move past the threshold. She paused with one hand on the frame, then crossed back inside without hesitation. He handed her a cloth and water. She washed her hands and face slow. "Name's Silas," he said. She looked up. "Nita." He nodded. That was enough. They ate again, bread and beans on tin. Outside, chickens scratched, the dog circled and lay down. After breakfast, Silas gathered his tools for the fence. He didn't ask her to come. She followed anyway, handing him the hammer. Holding rails steady, watching each task with quiet focus. They worked until the sun was high, then returned in silence. That afternoon she swept the porch with a bundle of twigs. Later she boiled water, washed dishes, and put everything back where it had been. She remembered. That evening he cooked stew. They ate, cleaned, and she folded the blanket neatly, laid out a straw mat near the stove. She didn't claim space, just took the corner she'd used. "You plan to stay?" he asked. She nodded once. "Then you can have the bed tomorrow." She blinked, surprised. "I don't need it." "I didn't ask if you did." "I'm offering." She nodded again. Outside the wind rose, but the house held. Inside nothing was owed. Nothing was forced. And by the time the lamp went out, she hadn't looked toward the door once. The next morning came colder. Wind pushed through dry trees. Chickens stayed close. The dog sat with ears low. Nita was already by the well, checking the rope, tying fresh twine. "I usually check that after breakfast," Silas said. "I'm already here," she answered. He let it go. They ate oatmeal. Later they walked the north fence line. She carried wire and a hammer. "Under a cottonwood," he asked. "You from this side of the river?" She shook her head. "Came west last year. Too much bad blood back east." He didn't ask more. By afternoon, a rider appeared on the far trail. Nita's body shifted, hand near her hip. They returned to the cabin. Silas loaded the rifle and set it by the door. The man arrived near sundown. He smiled too easily. "Looking for a young Apache woman." "Traveling with an older one." "A lot of folks pass through," Silas said. "I don't keep names." "Debt doesn't interest me," Silas added. The man mounted and rode off, dust trailing behind. Only then did Nita step from the back wall. You knew he was trouble. Didn't take much guessing. That night she slept on the bed. He took the chair by the stove. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Something had shifted, and both knew it wouldn't be the last time someone came looking. The sixth morning broke quiet and pale. Nita folded cloth into bandages, set them in a wooden box. Silas watched, half-buttoning his shirt. "Something I should know?" "Better to have them," she said. He nodded and went outside. She followed with ash and grit for the soil. They worked shoulder to shoulder. She moved differently now, more certain, less cautious. She rearranged shelves, stacked wood tighter, hung knives. He noticed but didn't stop her. At dusk, they sat on the porch in silence. A coyote called far off. "You ever live with anyone?" she asked. "Not like this." She didn't press. Later, she cleaned the rifle, reloaded it without asking. Outside, she drew 2 lines in the dirt. "What's that for?" "To track dust if someone's watching." "You expecting someone?" "Not yet." That night, she chose the floor again, even though the bed was hers. He didn't ask why. She didn't explain. The nights grew calmer after that, though neither of them ever said the danger was gone. Men still rode the distant trails, and the wind still carried rumors through the trees, but none came close again. Nita stayed, not because she was asked, and not because she was owned, but because she chose to. Over time, the cabin learned her presence, the way tools were set down cleaner, the way silence felt less sharp. Silas learned it too. What began as shelter became partnership, and what began as caution turned into trust. Out on that quiet stretch of land, 2 lives crossed without ceremony, bound not by words or trade, but by shared ground and the will to stand together.